All right, hello, all you crazy people out there. I hope everyone is staying safe, using your head, not panicking. Got toilet paper and got you a little water and stuff, right? I've just come off of a live stream where I actually saw some news today that just they finally got me. They finally got me. I finally did one of those videos again where I had to bash something. You can go check out the video. The lights should be uploaded by now. Where Brian Michael Bendis's Legion of Superheroes actually ended up becoming something written like a Shakespearean play compared to what Marvel is putting out here lately, right? So what do? I have to get my head around something that is quality. Something that is quality, something where you spent your money and you were invested and you were at the beginning of something very cool, very special. And I'm surrounded by Valiant comic books. We're taking an amazingly nostalgic look back to 1991, 92, maybe going into 93. Now, usually when I do these videos, you get a little bit of a history lesson in comics, what was going on with this company and stuff. But here's what's ironic about this. In the midst of one of the finest 2 years of comics that were coming out, in my opinion, where you actually had some quality, you actually had a connection, you could have actually been at the beginning of something. I was in the midst of about 3 years of a very interesting time in my life. I had started Image Comics had popped up. All of a sudden, the '90s was starting to rise, where that bubble was starting to blow out because we started having indie books that were successful. Marvel was starting their decline due to that talent coming out and underestimating the I mean, this is from my viewpoint of what was going on at the time. Okay, but Marvel really had us underestimated the talent pool out there. A lot of these indie comics and indie companies being able to rise up, and there was a point in the '90s where we had 800 comic books that could potentially have all been on the shelf at any given month there for a while. The cream of the crop really took a long time to rise through the glut of comics in the '90s. Hey, Kevin Kelly, what's going on out there, man? Hope you're staying safe and staying well. Um, so, in the midst of the early '90s and stuff, the irony is that they're following comics for all those years, having a false sense of hope with the new universe that a lot of readers at the time really wish they could have been there when Marvel started up in 1961 with that Fantastic Four #1. Wish they could have been right there when everything beginning. New universe popped up on the 25th anniversary of Marvel in 1986, and we all thought we were going to be there. John Jones, hey, just been robbed by Marvel. Just read the new X-Men one-shot, Jean Grey and Emma Frost. That fucker was like John Byrne Batman book. It had no words. I want my $4.99 back. Marvel is much like Bendis nowadays. They are now the I told you so company. You know better, yet you spend the money, and then you're like, yeah, they got me, and your friends are like, I could have told you so. So before you even got the book. Yeah. Oh, sorry that you got ripped off, man. But it's Marvel, man. It's Marvel. That's all there is to it here lately. Or a shadow of what Marvel was, right? So getting back to what I was talking about, in like 1986, we had the new universe come up, and I have the live stream video up of my amazingly nostalgic look back on New Universe. It amazed me how much love that video got for those books, because I said in there that this actually ended up being the template. The universe was the template for what would become the Valiant universe around '91. Jim Shooter, for many, many reasons, the new universe being a big part of it, ended up being removed, or maybe he resigned from Marvel. And then the next thing you know, I think he got some investors and he started this company from the ground up that would be Valiant. And all of a sudden, in grocery stores around 1990, if I remember right, I started seeing these WWF, that is the World Wrestling Federation, comics on the shelves, Nintendo comics on the shelves, Link, Super Mario, and stuff. And they all had this little symbol on there, and it said Valiant. These were licensed properties, and it was because of these licensed properties that Jim Shooter was able to acquire some old Gold Key Dell characters, such as Magnus Robot Fighter, Solar Man of the Atom, To Rock was in there, right? If I'm forgetting one, it's going to pop up because, like I said, I'm surrounded here by Valiant Comics here, right? Valiant and Valiant. So we're going to be looking through these, but by no means am I going to be going through every one of these books and stuff. We'll be here all night. Kevin Kelly, I actually bought my first Uncanny X-Men on Tuesday. It was from 95, pretty great. John Jones, I want Ninjak. Now, Kevin Kelly, I will tell you that the X-Men after Claremont had left are very hit or miss. They started out with a lot of energy, in my opinion. And then I got to tell you, the Age of Apocalypse, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I sort of reread it. Not word for word and page by page and comic by comic, skimming through, reading what caught my eye and everything like that. A lot of good energy there, but they did not have the secret for whatever Claremont had to be able to last 17 years. They really ended up taking what he built in 17 years and gutting it in 3 or 4 years. And then they really had to start being kind of like a new X-Men, if you will, right? So I'm so glad you found some good X-Men books from the 90s, sincerely. John Jones, I want a Ninjak run. Yeah, James Bond with as a ninja. Very, very nice. Joe Quesada, right? So the new universe, if you go back and look at that, I talk about what books were templates for what would become Valiant Comics in my idea. Yet that was, like I said, a dry run for the vision that Jim Shooter had, and he got to do it here. These were amazing books. Now, like I said, the reason you're not going to get a very in-depth history lesson from me is because besides the fact that I have tons of interviews, I have Wizard specials that go through and everything like that. The 2-3 years that Valiant Comics was a hot commodity, this was the stuff. I didn't even pull out the Image Deathmate Valiant crossover books and stuff like that. Is because this was a time where I was 18. The parents finally split up. Mom was with somebody else. The stepdad was struggling. I was bouncing around houses from friend to friend to friend. I would end up all over the place. I have a lot of stories I could tell. I was staying at friends, staying at strangers' places, getting my partying in. Then somewhere along the line, I ended up working in a comic book shop, hitchhiking for 9 months, joined the military, had some problems in the military, ended up coming back and ended up still doing military. There was a lot going on. In the middle of this, I somehow was able to pick up some of these books over the years and stuff, right? Off the shelves at flea markets. I was able to accumulate a lot of things. And a lot of it's quite a blur. Some of it may be a drunken partying. I was a child of the 80s, just to, fully commit to the story here. Not an alcoholic, just like to have a good time when I was able to do it. So there's a little gap there. And in those 9 months I was hitchhiking, getting on the trucker circuit and being paid to ride shotgun to keep them company and stuff. This is right when the world started to get really weird. I watched it where it was the generation of hippies who all would just go out and hitchhike to San Francisco, and it was a way of life to where this is where they were sort of dying out or on the road and stuff like that. And it was starting to get weird a little bit. So I have a lot of stories from that time, but Valiant was going on and I was sort of backing up with this here and there and catching up when I could. So Valiant Comics takes me back to a very exciting, adventurous, and a time where I would kill my kid if he did what I did during those several years. I got kicked out of my house, out of the stepdad's house a couple times. Got kicked out of the mom's house just for breathing, and hanging around with a lot of friends and just growing up real quick and stuff, right? And at the same time, the Valiant Comics, I could read them, and they were embedded in my mind for a long time, right? So Valiant Comics brought a lot of great things out there, man. They brought back these books, these characters that I would get as a kid in 3 for $1 packs, right? And they were with Gold Key. Before that, they were there during the 50s and 60s with Dale. To Rock was the one that was in the 50s. And here I am live on a show. Now, I want to say it was Russ Manning. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Who created the Magnus Robot Fighter, year 3000. Robots are everywhere walking around, and every now and then some of them will go bad, and you needed a man who was able to punch his way through steel. I don't know if there was ever an explanation why they didn't have weapons to take down these robots. I don't know. But anyway, they lived like this is pre-Jetsons, and they lived up in the clouds, up there. You never knew what was below them, what was, and things like that. But from what I understand, if I remember right, and please correct me in the comments here, but I believe it was Russ Manning, and he had worked on some Tarzan strips. And all of a sudden, when he wanted to create something new, he just did a reverse of Tarzan. Instead of being in the jungle and being very primitive and having a bunch of apes around, turned it into the future. We have our, could have been Tarzan, could have been Jane. Instead of apes, it's robots. It's in the future. It's sci-fi. We were coming out of that era of the Western and going into space and Sputnik and all that stuff. And sci-fi was taking off. A lot of good books came out of that. And they now have these properties, and he built the cornerstones of the Valiant universe with this, with Jim Shooter, with a lot of other people, Bob Layton, Barry Winsler Smith. For me, this is when Barry Winsler Smith truly became a star to a whole new generation of people. In my opinion, what was going on here, right? And it started out with books being in direct market. Here's number one. And they did a lot of promotions in here, right? They had tickets. I can't remember what they're called. They had coupons in here. Now, Jim Shooter knew what he was doing. The book would no longer be mint if you took the coupon out, but after you collected a certain amount of coupons, you sent them in and you would get 0 issues. All right, so a lot of people would buy 2 of them. He kept the print run low, and this is something that would Jim Shooter would, in my opinion, would pick from for when he took over, when he was allowed to be editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. I felt like that, Joe Quesada worked at DC, worked at Marvel, did the indie stuff with Ash, worked at a lot of companies. You'll probably see some of that here. And I just feel like he picked and chose all of these strategies for the marketing and stuff from where he was working at, right? And it was new, fresh, and on fire. And there's a lot of people who was skeptical because it was Magnus Robot Fighter. Yet again, a character that people remember for having some very straightforward, bland stories, very simple stories. And the significance of the Gold Key Dale connection is that Jim Shooter actually had the artist lay out the panels and do an art style reminiscent of it. So technically, you could feel like this was an extension of Gold Key characters with all their books that were here, right? So if you know those books and you go back and reread them, or you think about it and stuff, and you go back and look some early Valiant, you'll see it. I thought it was genius. He just used their house style for these books to keep it going. So Magnus took off. Here we go, right? And the stories were right off the bat were very significant. One of the first things that Jim Shooter started doing was expanding on this universe and this world in the future. The questions we always saw the great cities in the sky, but what's below? What's going on around the world? It was always in North Am. It was like Canada and America sort of became one country. They were just called North Am, North America, South Am, and stuff, right? And one of the things he did is we got introduced to a character named Rye. Before somebody usually got their own book, they would pop up in another book, and you had a collectible first appearance because they were about to get their own series. Valiant started getting hotter and hotter. You had to buy double sometimes. They had all sorts of ways that Jim Shooter knew to make them collectible. People were collecting these because they were collectible. So we got Rai. Ray. I call him Ray, but Rai, Samurai, is where I get it from. Who was sort of Japan's hero protector on the island. That was run by a mother. I think it was her name. One Computer. And over the years, Japan had been built up and built up and built up to where they ended up leaving Earth. The entire country was able to take the shape of like a dragon, a mechanical dragon, roll up in a ball, and it ended up going into orbit around Earth as like a new moon. He got into it, right? Some of these are flip books on the back, but I'm not going to take them out. Like I said, we got to get going. And then all of a sudden, one of the things that really caught my attention is we have Dr. Solar popping up in with Magnus Robot Fighter, I was like, oh my God. Here we go with the Rai, started the Rai, Samurai is where I come from. I'll call them Rai, popping up. And we got started seeing this world. And the whole time, the idea of this being in the real world, also Jim Shooter would tell you what day, year, time, everything that these stories were taking place. You could actually do a timeline with all these books. They were passing in real time, but he didn't get caught up in having one book. And then a month goes by for the characters until the second book comes out, and a month had passed, right? He kind of got around that. I think they learned their lesson with the new universe like that, wanting them to age, right? So 1991 was 91, 1992 is 92. You might have caught up. They might have slowed down, but they always kept with it. So you ended up having very sophisticated stories, a lot of these characters coming back that was new attitudes. And then they got me with this. Magnus ended up going into the, oh my God, what was it called? The Lost Land of Turok. We had Turok pop back up. And I flipped out. And they were setting up for their first company crossover by using things that were already there. And we'll get into that and stuff, right? I can go on with Magnus and all that stuff, right? So some of the things that they did here. Wow, I got a bunch of that one issue. So some of the things they started doing is it really felt like Jim Shooter was really over it. It ended up being like he was the Stan Lee, where it looked like he was writing almost everything. He was looking over everything, making sure everything fit. I mean, he was seriously keeping continuity tight in a way that you could follow, building up to things. You always felt like these books had momentum. There was always little hints and nudges that this was one universe. And they ended up having a kid who was a geomancer walking around with some of these characters popping up in books and stuff, right? But then what I want to talk about is Solar. This is the hardback, because what happened is, we had Solar, and if I remember right, you would have, the story taking place, and you felt like you came into the middle of a story. Meanwhile, in the first 9 or 10 issues, there was a backup feature, a couple pages by Bray Rensler Smith, where we were getting the origin of Solar, which was collected in Alpha and Omega, and then you would also just get this page, just a page of art, and it was a piece of a page that you, with each issue, you could add to. And what they were doing was making the world's largest comic book panel, which you can unfold in this hardback with a slipcase and stuff. I have seen these things go for nothing at flea markets and comic book shows and stuff. So I'm glad I have one. And mine is beat up. I think I had this probably about 6 months after it came out when I got it on discount. But it is basically Solar number 0. So to see what the world's largest comic book panel was going to look like, you had to continue buying the book and to get the story. And like I said, if I remember right, we are going on a 29, 28-year-old memory, even though I've read this and things like that since then. When this was happening, I think by the time they got the backup feature, caught you up to where you could go back to the number 1 and see what was going on. Turns out Solar destroyed his world. And then he came into this earth and he took over his own body, and it doubled his power. And Jim Shooter really got into the quantum physics of things, of energy and moving energy. He was laying the foundation to where, if you'd really read into it, it sort of explained why we could have people with superpowers, if you will, in the real world. It was all about the energy and stuff. Meanwhile, what he did not know is that there was a lady who was with him when he was exposed to, he worked at a nuclear power plant. I guess we can go from there. But another person also had the same powers he had, and then she would end up causing the Unity crossover. These things were building up. It was just amazing to get payoffs to all these books you were following if you were into it. And that's what made them worth going out and trying to find and collect. So with Solar, made me a fan of I love the covers, the Barry Windsor Smith books. Yeah, there's a reason that, there's 2 of them there. Maybe I'm remembering this wrong. They're fighting each other. Who knows? I need to go back and reread these. And over the years, I started just picking these up where I would find these. That's why I have a bunch of doubles. Now, if there was ever a book at the time this would have been the book that I wish they had made a promotional poster for. I would have. I'm dying to have this cover as a poster. I think this is a beautiful, serene cover. This is Barry Windsor Smith at his best. There's an atmosphere with this, right? Like I said, I got quite a few of them. And then also we got introduced to the spider aliens, right? And I always thought that this was a nod to David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust and the spider aliens of Mars and stuff, right? But we had these aliens coming down that he would be fighting. And like I said, they were spider aliens. Of course, my mind goes straight to Bowie. And they played a lot around that imagery. These spider aliens would end up popping up quite a bit. They would be responsible for Exo Man of War, and they would be responsible for Shadow Man. They did very well putting some bad guys in this universe for these guys to fight and to connect them all. And then, of course, they did an all-black cover. This was highly sought after for a while because the cover was easily damaged. And a lot of people would not see that they did a second printing. I don't have a second printing here, but there would be a Roman numeral 2 here that you actually would have to fill. And this was the first appearance of Eternal Warrior, which we'll see here in a minute. One of these I got off the stands, and one of these I found somewhere for nothing. And there's our Eternal Warrior, highly influenced by Highlander, in my opinion. So that's Solar. A lot of great stuff in there. The bench pin of this would be the Star brand of this universe. He was sort of responsible for the effects on the Earth for people to have powers and great things to happen. Right. So we were talking about Exo there. Does anybody have any questions out there? I'm just running off at the mouth here, trying to get through all these books. It's because, as you can tell, I really liked. And like I said, I'm not pulling out all the books. All right, yeah, that's a good place to go. I'll just get them all out. Now, one of the characters that I absolutely loved was, let's face it, this was a Viking. It still came off a little bit as Conan mixed with Iron Man because Bob Layton's on it. Bob Layton and Jim Shooter. Bob Layton apparently appeared to be very high in the company. And all of a sudden you had this living armor. Now, this was a time where the symbiote concept had been introduced with Venom. This is a couple years after that and everything like that, right? So you would actually off and on over the years throughout the 90s that I can recall, they would find an excuse to have the suit alive for some reason, right? Wildstar, Jerry Ordway's creation and image and stuff pops into my head. But this was alien technology. And these exosuits, there was different sort of suits and stuff, that different suits with different power levels and different names, but the exo was the most powerful of them all. And the suit would actually sort of take a hand in picking who could use it. When I remember, it was all about getting that ring. But what we had here is we had some quantum physics played around with, right? Time travel. Well, the relativity of time, not time travel. But basically, when people disappeared, yes, they were abducted by aliens and flying around. Years later, they would do an Exo Man of War Zero with Joe Quesada doing the art, where you finally got the story of how our Viking here was kidnapped, was abducted by aliens, and how he escaped the ship and got the Exo armor and returned to Earth. He would end up coming back to Earth, figuring out that it was not his time because he was flying around in spaceships. And he comes back and he ended up taking over an industry. There's a story here that I don't want to ruin and stuff. But Bob Layton was nailing it. We had Conan with high-tech gear. It was fantastic, walking through there, acting like a freaking Viking. And then all of a sudden they would give nods and rubs to one of their original series. Another original one, Harbinger, came in. And this is where a lot of people went back to check out Harbinger and found out that you could not find number one. Number one was a hot book. of Harbinger, which is, I've seen 3 or 4 in my entire life, and it just rubs me raw because one guy had 2 of them because he bought a collection for like $300 and he found 2 or 3 of them. But yeah, Harbinger #1 was a hot book. And again, I think it had the coupon in it. So you had to be careful. People were buying 2 of them, low print runs. It was just a simple math and stuff, right? Imagery was great. Again, their secret weapon of Barry Winsler Smith was coming on, doing covers of these characters. And there was a lot of payoff with this. They did some very cool things. This is after Unity. After the crossover Unity, which I'll show last and stuff, Eric actually got sent back to his barbarian times. Found out he didn't fit in. He was injured where I think a dinosaur had bit into him, and the armor let him know that it would probably take like 30 years for him to heal from his injuries while the armor kept him together. What do? You finally make it home and you can't take the armor off. So basically, not to leave you hanging, he ended up going he buried himself underneath under the ground, right where his company that he ended up owning would be something like 1,000 years in the future. And a tree had grown around him and stuff. So he had been in the front yard of that company to begin with. Okay, let that make your eyes cross. I thought that was very cool. And then the armor also, as it grew and matured, you got your redesigns on it. Very cool stuff. He would fight other people who had other armors from the spider aliens. Mix it up with Exo, little crossovers. The universe just kept tight and stayed tight. A lot of great concepts. Exo is fantastic, especially those first few, probably about the first 15 years, in my opinion. And a lot of things happened with him where they kept trying to bring him back. They really got away from what made him special. I'm not to pick up the trades when I can. Like I said about Harbinger, I'll go through those books in a minute, but these are in trades. This came with a Harbinger 0 that a lot of people wanted. So let me see what's in the box here. Let me see what we got here. Kevin Kelly, off topic. Do you know whatever happened to the Sergeant Rock movie that Arnold was supposed to be in? That Sergeant Rock movie goes all the way back that I swear I want to say the 80s, early 90s. And the only updates I ever got was in the back of a book. I think it was Comic Scene. If you got a magazine called Comic Scene, you went to the back of the book, the last couple pages, it would be nothing but listing off movies and where they were at and the little rumors with them. And to me, it just was in production hell, to the point that I remember hearing that it went from Arnold being there until it was going to end up being Bruce Willis there for a little bit, going by memory. So I think it was just production hell. And a lot of the things that Arnold Schwarzenegger did, I remember seeing him on Tonight Show one time talking about the trick to making a lot of money in movies is coming in on the back end. Meaning you work out a deal where you may get paid a little bit less to star in the movie because you're going to get residuals from the box office, a little trade-off there. So, yeah, I would say production hell, and it was a comic book movie, so maybe they didn't want to do that. Oh, is this my Harbinger? A lot of Solar. What do we got here? Yeah, here's some Harbinger books. And I'm going to go ahead and get the Ray out. And I'm just going to go ahead and get these out. We'll stop there with Eternal Warrior. Okay, so this is starting with number 2 because I never got a number 1, but Harbinger. Okay, now this book took off. I don't know how people were in the know. I don't understand how this series connected with a lot of people. I don't know how they knew, but this book was on fire. And if you went back and watched my New Universe, amazingly nostalgic look back at the New Universe, you would know that I said this is a combination of DP7 with the situation they're in, the company, the Harada company, who was bringing in psychics and kids with powers and stuff and kind of training them. Very X-Men like, sort of. But they took the kids from Cyforce who all had the sonic powers and stuff like that, a few of them and stuff, right? And I think you had Flamingo, I think it was her name, with the fire powers. She was pretty loose. just and honest about it. She knew what she was. I think this was Turk. I can't remember his name. Oh my goodness, it's been so long. But anyway, this guy was just around for a little bit. To me, this guy ended up being the Thunderbird. If you know your X-Men, this guy ended up being Thunderbird because he didn't last long. Yet it ended up being revealed that he played a very important part in one of the heroes' lives, if you will. Okay, there's a big secret that was revealed in Unity that finally revealed a lot of stuff about a character. Of course, you had this is Faith, but she called herself Zeppelin. She was sort of heavy set, but not obese, if you will, with the way they made her a couple years ago. And then the big guy was Sting, the most powerful one of them. And up here's Harada, who ended up becoming a very big villain in the Valiant universe and stuff, right? And they were on the run from the company. And of course, like I said, there's the character from X-Men of War with another version of their armor that they grew. Harbinger was on the run. They did it right. This had a huge impact. They kept it tight. Solar popping up, G-Man monsters popping up. And then you find out that they started getting divided because Sting's girlfriend ended up sleeping with this dude. And wow. And this girl was really into him. I mean, think 90210 realistically. You know what I mean? Everybody ended up sleeping with everybody, cheating on everybody. They were just all hurt and everything. And that ended up paying off in Unity, if you will. He dies. I'll just go ahead and tell you, he dies, and has his baby. And then they did the thing again where we were introduced to Hardcore in this book before we got to see their series Boom. And love this cover. And there's a lot of significance to this cover when it comes to Magnus. We'll just leave it at that. Now, a minute ago, I was talking about Rye. I talked about Rye. He had a short-lived series, right? I actually dug this series a whole lot. I really did. They paid off. It was well done. A guy named who was the star that came out of this, man? Let me think of his name. Oh, let me just look at him. Gonna make some room. I'll just set that there. And we'll just leave those there. David Lapham. There we go. David Lapham. That's who I'm trying to think of. A young kid named David Lapham, who I think was from New Jersey, kept going to the offices or something of Valiant Comics, and they would blow him off and kind of haze him a little bit and stuff because he wanted to work in comics. He finally would show up and he would work, and he stuck around, and they finally realized this kid was serious. And they started more or less training him, molding him, shaping him into the storyteller he would become. And he would be on several books, and you would be able to just kind of watch him just improve more and more and more. And David Lapham, it blows my mind that he's been in comics for 30 years now. He's done a little bit of Batman, wrote his own stuff. I think he did a Penguin story or something. And he's on the indie market a lot, right? But all of a sudden, we have this spin-off here of Magnus Robot Hunter on the other side of the world, and I really think it's a bit cooler than what they had. Yet this character was also short-lived. He had nanobites in his skin. He had the ancient traditions going on. Very rich story. It had its own culture in it. But then we had the coveted Ray number zero there for a while. And one of the things about this book, for you 4 people that are out there right now that are stuck around, you're going to get some very cool trivia here. This silhouette of the new Rye, if you will, if you look at it and you know your comics, that is actually the silhouette of a Mike Zeck Punisher, which I thought was very cool. When I saw this cover, I was like, well, that's kind of been done before. Little did I know that they actually took the Punisher outline, made a silhouette out of it, and it's Mike Zeck. Very cool. And this laid out, this book is just fantastic. You could have just actually almost quit buying Valiant comics because this laid out the next 1,000 years of their universe. This universe was so well structured that they had this story about what happens the next 1,000 years to kind of guide you. It was amazing. I never read anything like it. I never saw a comic book company commit to a history that much and still leave room for them to be able to expand on, keep telling stories. That just masterful. And like I said, I think Ray Rye just lasted about 8 issues and stuff, right? Actually, it was a good time. Okay. Then we have the Eternal Warrior here, right? The Eternal Warrior, Archer Armstrong, 2 brothers, and there's actually a third brother named Time Walker and stuff like that. Ended up, the Eternal Warrior was told, more or less it felt like the Earth had created him, and the Eternal Warrior knew that there was a great war coming that he would be needed for, and they ended up being eternal. They were able to heal for things. And they came from I wouldn't say a caveman times, if you will, but a very primitive time where we probably just started making huts. You know what I'm saying? So he's been around every time, and any time there would be a great war, he would go and join it. So this guy has fought wars for 10,000 years or more, I think, if I remember. And then it takes place in modern times. Meanwhile, his brother, Archer Armstrong, was just amazing because it felt like to me what they did is that if you were in LA and you went to an airport around or something like that, you would see a Hare Krishna, and then you would also see a drunk bum, hobo, homeless person. And they took those 2 concepts, ended up writing these 2 characters named Archer and Armstrong, which is fantastic. But we'll get to that. Here's the first appearance of Bloodshot that I have 2 of. Actually, I should have 3, but I don't know what happened to the original there. Master Dark, which ties into Shadow Man and all this stuff like that. But there's a lot of flashback stories for the Eternal Warrior. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you're a fan of Highlander, I very much feel like you should be a fan of Eternal Warrior. And then, like I said, this book came out, and this is the one where I would just study Barry Windsor Smith's art. This was the humor mag. One kid thinks he's the greatest fighter in the world because his parents killed him, and he ended up seeing a great light and told he had a great destiny, and he came back to life, and he ended up being finding his way to like a Tibetan monks or something who trained him all his life with fighting and crossbow skills and stuff. And he was always convinced that he was the greatest warrior in the world. But he spent a lot of time having Archer grab him, running from people, thinking the kid was crazy. And we never really got to see him, be the greatest warrior in the world. We don't know if it's real or not. It's very comedic. It would have a lot of people popping in there as guest stars. Like the Vatican has been trying to kill Archer for centuries because they think he's some demon where he keeps coming back to life in their eyes and stuff. He gets kidnapped. They throw him in a dungeon, and the kid is, Archer is, I got him backwards. Armstrong has, the Vatican thinks he's some great evil demon because he's lived long and, keeps coming back to life and stuff. But he's been caught many times over the centuries, and they keeps throwing him in the same dungeon. And he knows how to walk around the dungeon, escape. He knows the way around the Vatican. He knows where the wine cellars are. And he knows where the secret tunnel is that brings you out into the Pope's room. And they walk through the bedroom of the Pope while he's taking a nap. It's hilarious how they do it. It's fantastic. Where's my Shadow Man books? All right. So then you have the Shadow Man, right? Steve Englehart jumped on board with this one, and he actually ended up taking his original concept of what he wanted the book to be, took it to Malibu when they were doing the Ultraverse, and he ended up being Nightman, Shadow Man, Nightman. There you go. This is the template for the Nightman. The Nightman ended up getting its own syndicated show also. And I remember reading an interview, I think it was with Steve Englehart, talking about he's not a rip off of Batman because Batman is the night. This man is of the night, is of the shadows. But basically, what happens is we have a person who's Creole down in New Orleans. He's a jazz musician, plays saxophone, and they really play on the very French-inspired Creole New Orleans feel. I mean, there's an atmosphere here when you get into this book where it makes you want to go down there during Mardi Gras. And basically, what you find out if you've been reading the other books is Jack, our character there, gets bit by one of the spider aliens. But when he wakes up and he's running around and hears a woman screaming, he finds a Mardi Gras mask, and all of a sudden it's like he's adrenalized and he's fighting off this attacker and stuff. And he feels possessed when night comes out. He doesn't know what it is, but he has to go out and do things. And all of a sudden he's taking chances. I always wanted the T-shirt of his symbol there, which is just fantastic. Shadow Man, to me, Shadow Man and Charlton 66 and I met Bob Hall a couple, maybe it was last year, the year before, at Baltimore Comic Con, and then Bob Hall ended up taking over this book. Steve Ditko ended up working on this book, which was amazing. Jim Shooter came on. I think he was doing a lot of the writing and stuff. He was kind of fighting domestic disturbances leading up to a lot of things, taking on people in the swamp, maybe some cannibals or something. And Bob Hall, when he ended up taking over the book, kind of revealed that Shadow Man was actually Valiant's failure. And he came on and ended up taking these books all over the place. Bob Hall writes plays. He's the artist on some of the Squadron Supreme in the 80s. It's amazing. I got a ton of his stuff. I went blank, but he ended up writing this, and he really turned the book around. And he revealed some things to us. Now, the thing about Shadow Man that really kind of turned the book around is Shadow Man would end up finding out that he was going to die in the year 1999. He knew he was going to die. And this is like in 1992. Time was really passing, in real time for us in him with these books. What we got here? Kevin Kelly, I just found a Shadow Man with Aerosmith in it. And it's one of those books you can't pass on. The story behind that is that there was somebody in the marketing department or something at Valiant Comics who used to work in the music industry with bookings or something like that. So he actually knew Aerosmith in real life and kind of was able to ask them, hey, man, you want to be in one of our comics? So the stories behind the stories with Valiant are fantastic, right? But I could go on and on. Master Dark came in as a player. And Shadow Man just got more and more reckless. I mean, if you know when you're going to die, that means you can do all kind of stuff now and take big risks because it's already time can't be changed. That's one of the rules with the Valiant universe, if there are rules. He's already been told by somebody in the future he died in 1999. So he starts taking these amazing chances, jumping off buildings, jumping on top of cars, playing it up. And all of this, and like I said, it was just fantastic. Now, I called this stream, video, whatever, Valiant the Jim Shooter years, right? And that's because there was a coup, from what I understand. A coup had happened at Valiant Comics. A claim had come in to buy them. Valiant Comics had been built up that it ended up becoming a commodity, that all of a sudden a claim come in. Comics were, booming at the time. Everybody wanted a piece of it. And there's a bit of a coup. What I heard allegedly was Bob Layton kind of led it. A lot of people agreed with it. They pushed Jim Shooter out, and they ended up getting bought out. Jim Shooter ended up getting some backers, and we got the Defiant universe, which built on that Xerox blueprint of the new universe once again. And he actually referred to the Valiant universe as the test run, and the Defiant universe was going to be the real thing, which is just amazing. But we, luckily enough, after following these books, after the low print run, after people buying doubles, after people thinking they can invest in comic books at this time, with the quality people also there getting these because these were quality stories. I mean, I'm on a stack of books here and stuff. We got our big payoff to the Shooter years, if you will, in Unity. And you talk about the marketing for this, okay? This was a promotional thing, right? And this was free. free. The first chapter of the big world crossover. Now you got to understand, relatively new were company crossovers, even though DC and Marvel had really picked up on them since Crisis on Infinite Earths. You can even go back to Secret Wars if you want, right? But Secret Wars 2, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Marvel Massacre, the Mutant Massacre and the X-Men books. A lot of this was new, and people were finding different ways to do it. Some were crap. Millennium at DC was just horrendous. Invasion is a mixed bag at DC, and we were having things like Acts of Vengeance at Marvel, where we're going to have our heroes fight villains they've never fought before. We're going to mix it up. It was just like booking for wrestling and stuff, right? So all of a sudden you've got this world building, this continuity, this well-crafted stories where each story built on the other story, and slowly everybody was connected in this world in a very organic way where it made sense that when they all came together, it didn't feel forced or anything. It was amazing. So they took everything that was there and they end up in oh my God, the Lost Land or whatever it's called that Turok lives in, because this is a place where time is real and everybody ends up getting there a different way. And basically the person that they're after, Erica Pierce, I think it's her name, she is creating a machine that is going to wipe out all time and rebuild it from the very beginning up in her vision. We were all going to die. And the only place you can do it is in the Lost Land because it's unity. Time is absolute. This says time is not absolute, and that's here. Time is a circle. They get into the quantum physics of it and study it, and a very easy way to follow it is like, here's the plot, here's what we're doing, and all these characters end up spending months and months. I have several of these. Months and months in this lost land trying to find Erica Pierce and her army she's built up over the years. These were free, but there was still limited. They were still limited on how many they were going to make. So comic book shops, and I think I was working at a comic book shop by this time. Okay, I'm almost positive. Whenever Archer and Armstrong #1 came out, which was around Unity, I was working at a comic book shop somehow. I think, yeah, I was. Anyway, but when they came out, they had to choose who got these books, and if you were collecting, Valiant comics, more than likely your shopkeeper, your comic book store decided only the most deserving will get them. Yeah, like I said, I have several of these. These were there, and then years later they had a lost chapter there. So I kept all this. So Frank Miller came on and did the 6 covers. I actually used to know the story behind how they got Frank Miller to come in and do the covers. But Unity Chapter 1, Unity Chapter 2, at the very top of them, it told you exactly what order to read these books. So the first wave, had the Frank Miller covers, and they do all connect. The Frank Miller covers do connect. Oh, my goodness. I didn't realize I had so many. Archer and Armstrong, #1, Chapter 3, Frank Miller covers. Frank Miller being, doing anything to do with Magnus Robot Hunter made put a spark that flew out of my brain and, from my brain out my ear. So this was just really cool. And you just didn't know where this was going, where you had all the other crossover events, even like Crisis on Infinite Earths. They moved so fast, boom, 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 boom. You felt like maybe a month went by. I think this took place over a year. And you got to see everybody's part in the Lost Land. They were not united. And Shadow Man ends up actually messing everything up. It's because of him. Solar wasn't able to just end it right when it started, and he was trapped for a while. So Unity is a fantastic read. And maybe if I was going to talk about Unity in depth, I'd have to do a completely different video, not a live stream. And then the second wave of books that came out were by Walt Simonson, and all of his covers connected. These were fantastic. You started realizing that all these characters were spread out across the place. A baby is born. Okay. And what's funny is the covers actually after you read the story, you see they were telling you something all at the same time. Magnus Robot Fighter was there. Exo ended up being there. He got damaged. Shadow Man was there. It's where he finds out that he's going to die in 1999. Just great stuff and a big payoff. And then you got the chapter 18, which was $1.50 at this time. But you end up finding out one of the most amazing, in my eyes, one of the most tragic, amazing, and actually a sign of the times. You actually apply this to a lot of people now. Nowadays, why did Erica Pierce want to remake Time? You come to find out that like one of her favorite movies and one of her favorite soundtrack albums was Wizard of Oz. She wanted to go over the rainbow to a land of Oz and stuff, right? Because she was being molested by her father, you know, and when it kind of like damaged her as it should and stuff, right? And it also has a bit of an underlying lesson, if you will, maybe that Erica Pierce, she can't change herself, so she expects everybody else to change, which to me is like, it just goes to show that there's always people rising up that don't want to change. They want to change other people. Touches on fascism and politics and all kinds of things and stuff, right? So very smartly written. And of course, after Unity happened, you knew something was going on because some of the books started getting a different tone. The stories weren't as good. You feel like you were getting a lot of filler, a lot of filibuster, in my opinion. Then they had another swing up because all of a sudden they had a crossover with Image Comics, where it was the 90s is very interesting because if you go back and look at it, before you had DC and Marvel doing amalgam, and even after that, there was some companies coming over where they were merging their universes as much as they could. And that's what Valiant Comics and Image did. Image did a couple books and Valiant did a couple of the books, but it was supposed to be in one universe and stuff, right? And they were designated by colors. Deathmate Red, Deathmate Black, Deathmate Green, Deathmate Blue. It was just a fun series, you know, to see Valiant kind of stepping in there. And a lot of people were praising Valiant Comics. Wizard magazine, that probably not even a year old, was jumping in there and they put out a special on Valiant Comics and stuff when they were there. But like I said, the coup happened. Jim Shooter was moved out. We started missing his editorials in there. You got started knowing about Kevin, you know, people you never would have thought. Janet Jackson, Kevin Van Hook, everybody you knew who was there. And it had a bit of a 60s Marvel feel with feeling like you were part of this bullpen. You know what was going on. Jim Shooter was talking to you. And he's kind of giving you warnings of things he knew was happening and stuff, right? So, you know, you felt invested in it. You felt like you were collecting things. Now, I've showed a lot of books and stuff, but after Shooter left, Joe Quesada came on, started doing some covers, led up to Ninjak. Somebody had, you know, they started bringing out new characters and stuff. They kept moving forward, trying to do that Valiant formula. And they ended up changing styles, bringing in Bart Sears on Exo Man of War, Dan Jurgens on you know, Solar Man of the Atom, and they started mixing up. They lost that continuity, that one world feel, and started just doing comic books and stuff, right? After Acclaim had taken them. And I'm not going to go into what they did with Shadow Man. But you know, it was a very special time there, at least for, you know, a year and a half, maybe. Some great stuff. You know, it was very exciting. People were very excited about collecting. The books were collectible. A lot of the books still are collectible. So, you know, look in those books, see if those are Valiant comics from 91 or 92 that you might look up and find. They really are. The more you get of that era, the better they are. And man, I'm just surrounded by books. I got to put these back in the box. So thanks for everybody that hung out here. Thanks for everybody that, you know, actually stayed the whole time. That's awesome. Listening to me talk. I'm a bit reminiscing about some of the stuff. And hey, I don't know. Maybe I'll do the Defiant comics or something, right? Okay, guys, sub, share, hit the bell, do all that stuff. Be excellent to one another. And